Okay, today guys we are going to talk about how to factor a trinomial with an a value of 1. So before we get started, something that I need to bring your attention to is what's called standard form of a trinomial. Standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. The a is always going to be in front of your x squared. The b is always going to be in front of your x, and the c is always going to be your constant out there by itself. Now, the method that I'm going to teach you today is called easy factoring because it's literally so easy to do. Now, to be able to easy factor, you have to have a trinomial and you have to have an a value of 1, which means that the number in front of your x squared has to be a 1. Now, all you have to do in order to easy factor is find the factors of your c value, which in this example is 6, that add together to be your b value, which is 5. So if I list out my factors of 6, I have 1 and 6, 2 and 3, negative 1 and negative 6, and negative 2 and negative 3. And I want to find the two factors that add together to equal 5. So if I take 1 plus 6, I get 7. 2 plus 3 gives me 5. Negative 1 plus negative 6 gives me negative 7. And negative 2 plus negative 3 gives me negative 5. So the two factors that multiply together to be 6 and add together to be 5 are 2 and 3. Now, we split our trinomials up into two binomials, and the first term of each one of those binomials is just going to be the variable that you're working with, which in this case is x. The second term is going to be the two factors that you found, which we found were 2 and 3. So it'll be x plus 2 and x plus 3. Now, it doesn't matter which order you put it in. You could put x plus 2 times x plus 3, or you could put x plus 3 times x plus 2. This is all you have to do. Now, you can always check your work by foiling to see if you get the correct answer. So first gives me x squared, outside gives me 3x, inside gives me 2x, and last gives me 6. Now 3x plus 2x add together and gives me x squared plus 5x plus 6, which is what I started with. So what we're doing today, easy factoring, is kind of just reverse foiling. It gets you what you started with. So let's give it a shot. On number 1 it says x squared plus 13x plus 22. Now, the first thing, guys, you always need to check for a GCF. X squared plus 13x plus 22 does not have a greatest common factor. So now I just need to find the now I need to see, we have a trinomial, we have three terms. I need to see if my a value is 1. Since my a value is 1, I can easy factor. So now I need to find the factors of my c value. So you've got a little space over here to the right. Let's just list out the factors of 22. I've got 1 and 22, 2 and 11, negative 1 and negative 22, negative 2 and negative 11. Now I want to go through and see which of those factors add together to be a positive 13. Now right away, I hope you'll notice that if I take a negative plus a negative, I'm not going to come back with a positive 13. So these factors are out. Now let's see what I have left. If I take 1 plus 22, I'm going to get a result of 23, and that's not what we want, so that's out. If I take 2 plus 11, I'm going to get a result of 13, and that is what we want. So 2 and 11 are the factors that we want to use. Now, all we need to do is come down and make two binomials. Remember, binomials have two terms. Now, the first term in each one of our binomials is just going to be the variable that we're working with, which in this problem is x. The second term in each binomial are the factors that we chose, 2 and 11. And since they're both positive, they both get plus signs. Now let's try it again on number 2. A squared minus 5a minus 14. I have an a value of 1, which is in front of my variable that's squared here. So that means I want to find the factors of my c value that add together to be my b value. So I'm going to start by finding the factors of negative 14. Now to do that, guys, I'm going to teach you a little trick. Let's ignore the negative sign for a minute and let's just focus on the 14. If I were to find the factors of 14, it would be 1 and 14, 2 and 7. then you know that one of those numbers has to be negative. So I'm just going to make the left sides negative here. Then I'm going to list those factors again, 1 and 14, 2 and 7. This time I'm going to make the other factors negative, negative 14 and negative 7. Now we want to add them together to see which factors add together to be my b value here, which is a negative 5. Now think carefully. If you're adding a negative number to a positive number and you end up with a negative number, that means the bigger of the numbers had to have been negative. So these numbers right here are out. Now if I add 1 to negative 14, I'm going to get negative 13. So that's not what I want. And if I add 2 to negative 7, I get negative 5. And that is what I want. So my factors are 2 and negative 7. Now we just break up into our two binomials. The variable that we're using goes first, so since we're using a here, I have a, and my factors go second, 2 and 7. Now 2 is positive, so that gets a plus sign. 7 is negative, so that gets a minus sign. Let's try it again on number 3. X squared plus 4x plus 12. I have a trinomial and my a value is 1, so that means I want to find the factors of my c value that add together to be my b value. So I want to list the factors of negative 12. Again, I'm only going to focus on just the number 12 first. 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Now, if I want them to be negative, that means either the smaller number has to be negative or the bigger number has to be negative. Instead of listing all the factors, let's do some logical thinking to figure out which one has to be negative. When I add my two numbers together, I'm left with a positive number, which means that my bigger numbers are going to have to be positive and my smaller numbers are going to have to be negative. Now, let's see which two add together to be 4. Negative 1 plus 12 gives me 11. Negative 2 plus 6 gives me 4, so those are the factors that I want to use. So create your two binomials. Your variable goes first, and your factors go second, negative 2 and positive 6. On number 4, again, my a value is 1, so I need to find the factors of my c value that add together to be my b value. So my c value is 10, my b value is 7. Go ahead and pause the video and find me the factors of 10 that add together to be 7. Hopefully you got the factors to be 2 and 5. That means this trinomial splits up into two binomials where the variable that I'm using goes first, so t goes first, and then I have a positive 2 and a positive 5. Let's try it again on number 5. Again, I have x squared minus 5x minus 24. A value is 1, so let's find the factors of negative 24 that add together to be negative 5. Pause the video, find those factors. Hopefully, you found those factors to be a positive 3 and a negative 8. So, I can split up into my two binomials. The variable goes first, and then I have a positive 3 and a negative 8. Let's try it again on number 6. On number 6, I have b squared minus 4b plus 4. Again, I have an a value of 1 in this trinomial, so let's find the factors of 4 that add together to be negative 4. Pause the video and find those factors. Alright, hopefully you found those factors to be negative 2 and negative 2. So, when you break it up into the binomial, your variable goes first, and the factors go second, negative 2 and negative 2. What I'd like you to do next is pause the video and do number 7 completely on your own. Alright, hopefully you found the factors that worked for this one were 1 and 3, so I have the quantity of x plus 1 times the quantity of x plus 3. And again, guys, if you wrote them in the opposite order, if you have the quantity of x plus 3 first and the quantity of x plus 1 second, that's definitely okay. It doesn't make a difference. Let's go down to number 10. Now on number 10, they want us to solve the equation. So if I have x squared minus 4x plus 3 equals 0, that means I need to factor it in order to use the zero product property. So I want to find the factors of positive 3 that add together to be negative 4. So positive 3 has factors of 1 and 3, and negative 1 and negative 3. Well, the two that add together to be a negative 4 are negative 1 and negative 3. So this trinomial can break up into the quantity of x minus 1 and the quantity of x minus 3 equals 0. And then at this point, I hope you'll notice that we have two terms multiplied together to equal 0. So I can take my first term, which is x minus 1, and set that equal to 0. And I can take my second term, which is x minus 3, and set that equal to 0. Then I can solve. If I solve my left guy here, I add 1 and get x equals 1. And if I solve my right guy here, I can add 3 and get x equals 3. That means my two solutions to this problem are 1 and 3. Oop, that was terrible. Let me try that again. There we go. Okay, let's try it again on number 11. So on number 11, I have an a value of 1, and I want to solve for y here, so I need to find the factors of 4 that add together to be negative 5. So if I think through the factors, I have 1 and 4, 2 and 2, but if they have to add together to be a negative, that means I want to work with the negative factors. Now the two factors that multiply together to be 4 and add together to be negative 5 are negative 1 and negative 4. So let's break up into our two binomials. The variable goes first, the factors go second, minus 1 and minus 4. Then don't forget to bring down your equal 0. You can't solve unless it's equal to 0. Now we can take each one of our terms and set them equal to 0. I can take y minus 1 equals 0, and I can take y minus 4 equals 0. Now if I have y minus 1 equals 0, I can add 1 to each side, and y is going to equal positive 1. If I have y minus 4 equals 0, I can add 4 to each side and get y equals 4. So the two solutions to this problem are 1 and 4. Let's go down to number 13. On number 13, if you'll notice, I have x squared on one side and x plus 2 on the other. I can't solve this guy until it's set equal to 0. So I need to subtract these terms over in order to get my trinomial all on one side. So I'm going to start by just subtracting my x term. So I'm going to have x squared, and when I subtract x, that's going to become a negative x over here and leave me with a positive 2 over here. But then I need to keep going and subtract this 2 as well. So I'll get x squared minus x minus 2 equals 0. Now I have a nice trinomial with an a value of 1, so I can easy factor. Let's find the factors of negative 2 that add together to be negative 1. So I have 1 and 2 as the factors, but if I'm adding them together to get a negative number, the bigger number needs to be negative. So this is going to break up into two binomials, with the first term being x, and then I'm going to have a positive 1 and a negative 2. Then I can bring down my equal 0. Now I'm going to take each one of these terms and set them equal to 0. I can take x plus 1 and set it equal to 0, and I can take x minus 2 and set it equal to 0. Then if I subtract 1 from each side, I get x equals negative 1, and if I add 2 to each side, I get x equals positive 2. So my answers are negative 1 and positive 2. On number 15, let's try it again. I want to find the factors of 36 that add together to be a negative 12. So go ahead and pause the video and find those factors for me. Hopefully, you found those factors to be negative 6 and negative 6. So I can break them up into two binomials, with x being my first term in each, and then I'm going to have minus 6, and minus 6 equals 0. I can take x minus 6 and set it equal to 0, and I can take x minus 6 and set it equal to 0. Then I'll add 6 to each side and end up with x equals positive 6, and I'll add 6 to each side over here and end up with x equals positive 6 again. Now hopefully you'll notice that these two answers are the exact same. Sometimes that happens. When you write your solution, Even though you have two numbers, since they're the same number, you only need to write it once. There's no need to write it two times. Alright, next let's go to number 16. On number 16 I have t squared minus 8 equals negative 7t. Again, we need to set this equal to 0, so I'm going to add 7t to each side. Now, be careful, because when I do that, I want to make sure it goes in standard form. So when I add 7t to the left side, I'm going to make sure it goes in between the t squared and the negative 8. So I'm going to have t squared plus 7t minus 8 equals 0. Now what I'd like you to do is pause the video and factor this one on your own. Then we can come back and solve it together. Hopefully when you factored, you found the factors to be a positive 1 and a negative 8. So I'll have t plus 1 and t minus 8 equals 0. Now I can take that t plus 1 and set it equal to 0, and the t minus 8 and set it equal to 0. Over here I can subtract 1 from each side and t equals negative 1. Over here I can add 8 to each side and t equals 8. So my two solutions are negative 1 and positive 8. Let's go to number 18. On number 18, I hope you'll notice that this is not in standard form. So before we proceed, we need to rearrange it so that it's in order from highest degree to lowest degree. So the x squared needs to go first, the negative 8x can go second, and the negative 9 can go third. Then bring down your equal 0, and we're ready to factor. What I'd like you to do now is pause the video and solve number 18 completely on your own. Hopefully, you found the factors to be a positive 1 and a negative 9. So we have the quantity of x plus 1 times the quantity of x minus 9 equals 0. Set up your two equations and solve, and we get our two solutions to be a negative 1 and a positive 9. On number 19, they want you to solve the following quadratic equations by factoring, and we need to talk ourselves through the factoring cheat sheet. That's the colored sheet of paper that we've given you. This cheat sheet is going to help you think through what needs to be done for each quadratic, each polynomial. Alright, so on number 19 I have 6x squared plus 3x plus 0, or equals 0. Now on the top of your cheat sheet, the very first thing you're supposed to look for is a greatest common factor. This should happen on every single problem. So if I look, I have a 6x squared plus 3x that I need to look at. My coefficients are 6 and 3, and I want to know if there's a greatest common factor between them. Well, 3 can go into both 6 and 3, so I can factor out a 3. Then, if I look at my two variables, I have an x squared and an x. Since they both have the same variable, I can take out a variable, and I want to take out the smallest exponent. So between the two terms, I have an exponent of 2 and 1, so I only want to take out a 1. Now, let's see what's left. Remember, to figure out what's left, we divide what we had by what we're taking out. So 6x squared divided by 3x. 6 divided by 3 leaves me with 2. And if I had 2 x's and I'm taking away 1, I'm left with 1x. Now let's look at my second term. 3x divided by 3x. The x's cancel out, and 3 divided by 3 just leaves me with a 1. So I have 3x times the quantity of 2x plus 1 equals 0. Now, before you start solving, you need to make sure that you're done factoring. And you are done factoring if your degree is no longer 2. Now, in my binomial, my degree is a 1. So that means that's all I had to do was take out the GCF. Now I can take each term and set it equal to 0. So I can take 3x equals 0, and I can take 2x plus 1 equals 0. Now let's solve. If I have 3x equals 0 over here, divide by 3, and my x equals 0. 2x plus 1 over here equals 0, so I can subtract 1, and 2x is going to equal negative 1. I can divide by 2, and x equals negative 1/2. And my two answers are 0 and negative 1/2. Let's try it again on number 20. Again, the first thing that we are supposed to look for is a greatest common factor. So 2x squared plus 8x plus 6 equals 0. Here we definitely all have even numbers, so I have a greatest common factor of 2. So if I take out a 2, let's see what I have left. 2x squared divided by 2 leaves me with x squared. 8x divided by 2 leaves me with 4x, and 6 divided by 2 leaves me with 3. Close your parentheses and don't forget your equal 0. Now on the inside of my parentheses, we still have a degree of 2, so we have to keep factoring. And in order to keep factoring, let's see what's next on my cheat sheet. After asking if there was a greatest common factor, we had to ask ourselves how many terms there were. There were either 2 terms or there were 3 terms. Now if there were 2 terms, it was a difference of squares. But if there were 3 terms, the first thing that I wanted to look for was easy factoring, which means my a value has to be 1. So if I look on this problem here, x squared plus 4x plus 3, my a value is definitely 1, so I need to easy factor what's inside of the parentheses. This means we need to find factors of 3 that add together to be 4. Now hopefully you can get this one pretty quickly. The factors of 3 that add together to be 4 are just 1 and 3. So bring down your 2 because that doesn't go away, and we're going to break this trinomial into 2 binomials. Now remember, the first term of each binomial is the variable that you're working with, which is x. The second term are the factors that you found, a positive 1 and a positive 3. Then you can bring down your equal 0. Now we set each one of our terms equal to 0 to solve. So I'm going to set 2 equal to 0, x plus 1 equal to 0, and x plus 3 equal to 0. Now, if you'll notice in our first equation, there's no variable, so 2 equals 0 doesn't help us. Let's cross out that equal sign. In my second equation, I can subtract 1 and x equals negative 1, and in my third equation, I can subtract 3 and x equals negative 3. That means my two solutions are negative 1 and negative 3. On the next problem, I have 8x squared minus 18 equals 0. So again, the first thing I want to look for is a greatest common factor. Now if I look at 8 and 18, they're both even, so that means I can put a 2 in there. But let's make sure that's not, or that is the biggest one. A 4 can also go into 8, but 4 can't go into 18. And 8 can go into 8, but it can't go into 18 either. So 2 is our greatest common factor. Let's see what I have left. 8x squared divided by 2 gives me 4x squared. Negative 18 divided by 2 gives me 9. So 2 times the quantity of 4x squared minus 9 equals 0. Now we still have a degree of 2 here, so let's see what else I can do to factor this. So since there is 2 terms, let's look at our factoring cheat sheet. 2 terms means we want to look to see if it's a difference of squares. Now remember, difference of squares has to have a first term of a perfect square, a second term of a perfect square, and separated by a subtraction sign. So 4 is a perfect square, and so is x squared, so my first term is good. 9 is a perfect square as well, and we're seeing a subtraction sign here, so that means we're okay to continue. Just a reminder, difference of squares factors into what we call conjugates. So bring down the 2 and break into 2 new binomials. To find the first term in each binomial, we need to square root our first perfect square. So the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of x squared is x. So I have 2x. Now we do the same thing for our second perfect square to get my second term. So the square root of 9 is 3. Then one's going to be positive and one's going to be negative, and bring down your equal 0. Now I can take each one of my terms and set them equal to 0. So I can set 2 equal to 0, 2x plus 3 equal to 0, and 2x minus 3 equal to 0. Now, this first equation isn't an equation at all because we don't have a variable, so we can cross out that equal sign. My second equation, I can subtract 3 from each side and get 2x equals negative 3. Divide each side by 2, and I get x equals negative 3 over 2. My third equation, I can add 3 to each side and get 2x equals positive 3, and divide each side by 2, and x equals positive 3 over 2. That means my two solutions are negative 3 halves and positive 3 halves.